Hi there, and welcome back to the Complete C Sharp Masterclass. In the previous module, we had a look at how transient dependency injection works, what the life cycle means for that, and we just had a general run through of the different services that are there. And in this module, we'll have a look at the scoped approaches, which is slightly different, just from a life cycle perspective. In terms of transient, again, this will initiate every single object each time throughout the request. So it's better suited for items that, again, do not necessarily maintain a state, or it's a multi-threaded application and we need to spin up those instances every single time. But generally, if not, then it's a state-driven application and we need to remember the state of the item, or we just want to have more efficient memory usage. You want to go for scoped or singleton. It really just depends on your use case. I often prefer scoped over singleton just because with singleton there are memory buildups over time. Each of these has their own advantages and disadvantages. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So previously we had a look at the transient one, and next up we'll have a look at scoped. Now again, as you'll see, the code is exactly the same as what it was for transient. It's really the same item. The only difference is the container just sets up different life cycles in the background. But really it's doing more or less the same thing in terms of at least the initialization or mapping that we need to do. The only difference is the method that we're calling. Underneath here, obviously in the background, the collection in the DI container will set the disposal to dispose it as per the relevant scope. So in this instance, again, we've already gone through the code. So here, the logger logs the message, and then the payment service just uses the logger. The only difference here is really around the type of scope that we need to use. The scope will be slightly different because if we're adding scope, again, that will reuse the same objects throughout the entire life cycle. So if this had to come in, let's say an authentication service, somebody wants to log in and access a specific resource. These services would be used throughout that entire service. It would reuse the same service per the request. So if they've logged in and then they're still in that same session, it would reuse that same service. While if somebody had to log in and then have to go in and try to access that again, every time they try to access the specific thing, these objects would be recreated. And again, this is an example of where this would not be very useful, because if we're going to log in an item and we need to know about the state or the session or something, if we're recreating those objects every single time, we would not know whether the person has been authenticated or not. There are ways around this where you could like store it in a file or in a database or in some sort of session, but again, it's not necessarily the best approach. So that's an example where you do not want to use something like a transient approach. You'd prefer maybe a singleton or even perhaps a scoped. So yeah, it's just something to bear in mind. So yeah, at a high level, the code is exactly the same. The only difference is the life cycle. So just remember that, like if it's scoped, it will reuse the same instance throughout the same application every single time. Yeah, so that's at a high level it from the scoped approach. The code is really just the same for the items that it does. And just remember about the order. The order matters quite a bit here. So yeah, that's it from the scoped module. I will see you guys in the next one where we'll go over how the singleton approach works and why that's important. See you guys in the next module.